Yeah, we're super excited to have you and hear what you're up to now. Give us the brief synopsis of the fabulous years. And for anybody who thinks co-working and flex office just started, Mark is here to
Well,
share.
I'm here to tell you it's been around for a very, very long time. It's just called something else. Uh,
Exactly.
and then it became cool, of course, which was the biggest transition away from human storage, basically, to
Show. There we go. That was
to
uncensored. Human
there you go, human
storage.
storage to collaborative, community-driven space, right? So that's where we're at. So, which is very, very exciting. I think there's been a lot of key pivotal points throughout the years, and I think this time that we're in right now, more than any other time, is definitely very exciting to see what's going on. But yeah, you're right. Been around for a while, 25 years and change in the industry. But worked for some of the usual prospects, and most recently just started Flex Workspace Solutions, which totally came about by accident. As you know, I was working with the City Central guys, and we were going to change up the growth model for City Central. And was really thinking about how do we do that in a way that works for them and for me and for the team. And I mean, they're great guys. They're primarily real estate investors, and really wanted to focus on that side of it, as well as layering in the flex space, but doing it a slightly different way. And it just so happens that most recently, probably the last 6 to 12 months, I guess, I started getting a lot of calls from people saying, hey, we're kind of new to this, or we've been doing it for a while, we're struggling a little bit. Of course, everybody struggled through COVID for the most part. But this really wasn't COVID related. It was much more about, we just want to get our operation to the next level, or landlords wanting to open their own flex space, not sure how to do it. So it all came together, and I realized that we should probably set up a management company for the primary reason that we can actually help a bunch of different folks and not get wrapped up in what brand are we. So we're totally brand agnostic, which means we'll operate spaces for anyone, and our primary job is to operate those spaces in such a way that brings the vision of the owner or the operator of that space to life, right? So I don't need to put Flex Workspace on the building, whatever you want the brand to be. And I'm actually very interested in how many landlords now are saying, we love this project, we're really proud of it, we want Flex Space, but we want the Flex Space to mirror the brand that we're developing around this project. So whatever the project name might be, they want to add Flex to it. So, we can basically come in and take some of the knowledge that we've acquired over the years, and really help either landlords deliver flex space within their building, either under a brand or their own brand. And then our other group of customers really are operators that either need some help, and we all needed help at some time or another to really kind of, improve the performance of their location, or they are operators that have other business interests and they don't really have the time to dedicate to running the flex space, but they love the flex space. And they're really looking for a group with the experience to come in, run it for them under their brand, and just take the day-to-day burden off of them. So right now it's early days. We've been going since October of last year. I would say that those are the three primary kind of, I call them customers, but really they're more kind of partners that we're working with. So it's early days, but we've got off to a pretty solid start and having some really interesting discussions with some extremely interesting people.
Well, I love that you came out guns ablaze in selling, but we teased everyone with
I was like, well, there we go.
with 25 years of experience. We'll come back to that, I promise you. But let's
You asked me what we were doing, so
no,
I feel like
no, I think it's awesome. But I mean, I think the beauty of your background is you're kind of like Madonna. You've reinvented yourself over and over again. I mean, the other day I won't tell you who I was with, but you can probably figure it out. There are people that you worked with.
Right.
And I'll even give you a hint. I was in Boston.
I know. I was like,
Okay.
he's gonna look at your Instagram.
And they were like, "Oh yeah," I told them we were having you on the podcast. They're like, he used to go by the Burge, not even Mark." So I was
That's
like,
totally true. Yeah, that's totally true.
"So
Yeah,
let's go back to that. So how did you get
Let's go
into
back to the days of the
workspace
Burge.
industry, and how did you become the Burge, and at what point did you become Mark?"
it's interesting, but so that really started when I joined Regis,
Okay.
and not even in the early days of Regis. So when I joined Regis, I was a community manager, did a few other things.
Wait, this is a great story. You were a community manager. You were like,
yeah, for sure. I ran an
this
operation
is like
in,
the full life cycle.
yeah,
Very cool.
I ran a center in Fleet, which is in the southern part of England, and yeah, long story short, did a pretty decent job there. And a guy called Ian Kibblewhite, and for those of you who've been around for a while, you probably remember him. He called me up one day and he said, "Hey, I hear you've done some great things with this location. We'd like you to join the Riot team." And I'm like, "The Riot? What's the Riot team?" And he'd actually put together a team, the Regis International Opening team, hence the Riot team. And it really was a bit of a riot. And our job was to go anywhere that Mark wanted to open new locations, and basically kind of set the place up.
Make it happen. Yeah.
So I think I ended up, by the time I was done with that deal, the Riot team, I think I'd been to 26 different countries and lived and worked there, everywhere in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Mediterranean.
Wait, this was before Regis's first bankruptcy. This is like,
yeah, no, this is way,
like
way back in the day. Yeah. This is where we were just going crazy, right?
The world is your oyster. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yep, I'd get a phone call and get on a plane and go and open up. And of course, at that time, these were brand new first locations in these markets. We weren't going opening a second or third location in Romania. It was the very first one. So everything was like totally brand new, really sketchy, trying to learn out the lay of the land and everything else. But it was a lot of fun. And after I did that, I came to the US, and that's where I met Bob Goodrow, and who is an icon in this industry for those that have been around for a while. But Bob was the one. He refused to call me Mark or Mark Burge. He just called me Burge. He said, and it usually was in a sentence that went something like, "Hey Burge, get over here," or some kind of instruction.
A command.
A command. So Bob, what an amazing time working for both Ian and Bob. Bob was a tremendous mentor in many, many ways, but quite a character. But yeah, that's how Burge came about, is that Bob refused to call me anything other than that. And that's how it happened.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Bob stories out there, and I was told half are legendary and not true, and the other half are legendary and absolutely 100% true. So can you tell us your favorite story about Bob?
Well, there are also other categories, which is repeatable and not repeatable. Right. So it's not just about were they true or not. So probably have to stick with the repeatable ones. But Bob was he was a force to be reckoned with. I will tell you that when I was actually interviewing for Regis, when I first joined, I was waiting at the Staines location, waiting to be interviewed. And I was actually interviewed by Bob. And I remember I was sat in the lobby area outside of Bob's office, and somebody came along and threw a huge Regis book at me and said, "Yeah, read this while you're waiting for Bob. He's a bit busy. He's been delayed."
Regis, like an SOP book? Like, what do you mean?
It was we had these brochures, with all of the locations in them.
Okay.
So I'm sat there waiting for Bob, and he's notoriously always late. So I'm out there for quite some time, just flipping through this book, and all of a sudden, this really loud brash American comes busting out of an office. I'd never met Bob. And I'm just sat there reading the book. And I won't use the exact words he said, but it was something along the lines of, "And who the hell are you?" And of course, I didn't know who Bob was. And I told him who I was. And I said, "And who the hell are you?" And this was basically the guy that was running Regis at the time. So, and who I was interviewing in about 5 minutes after that. So it actually turned out to be a hilarious start to our interview. But yeah, crazy times. But that's how I first met Bob. But there you go.
So how long were you at Regis?
Just a little over 18 years, I think, all told.
Okay, so what's kept you, what's kept you in the industry? I mean, you've got this kind of new gig, but at no point were you like, "Oh my God, I cannot, I cannot." Like what were some of the things along the way that you're like, "Yeah, still here. I'm still excited. I'm good."
But that's you're wrong, because there've been plenty of times when I thought,
okay,
I'm just done with this. I need to do something new, need to do something different. And every time I've tried, it's just not worked out, because I always gravitate back to, but this is no fun. This is
right.
What I'm doing right now is way more fun than this. And I think plenty of people that have been in the industry for a long time would say that it's almost addictive. The camaraderie, even amongst competitors, quite frankly. Some people that I know very well hold in hugely high regard. They're essentially competitors, right? But we get together, we'll have a beer, we'll talk about how's it going for them, how's it going for us. We probably share information that in any other industry you probably get fired for. But we're all here to help each other out, and that's what I love about this industry. It's very, we're a community-driven industry, but even internally, I think we're a very strong community. We, for the most part, all want each other to succeed.
Yeah.
And that is tough to replicate, right? So, and the people are just great. I enjoy it. So
yeah, we just got to meet at Juicy, and Juicy, GWA are great examples. I know people who, I always think of Kane Wilmot. Do you know Kane from Canada?
I don't know him. I've heard of him.
Yeah, we should make sure you meet him at GWA. But he was a broker, I mean, early days. Right. And I think just his mind was blown when he came to the first GWA conference, because he's like, everybody wants to share everything. He's like, when you're a broker, it's all about like hoarding information. And
right.
He's like, you could ask anybody pretty much anything and they'll just tell you, because they want you to, right? They want you to succeed.
Absolutely. So, yeah. But it's always reciprocal though. And, I think it's a great indication of what it really means to be in this industry. I think, and like I said, it's tough to find something else that really fills that for you, I think. So, but anyway, yeah. So tried a couple of times, never worked out.
So at what point did you come to the US during your Regis career?
Oh gosh, that was, I can't remember what year it was, but it was right after the HQ acquisition.
Okay.
That took place. And I'd actually stopped doing the Riot thing, the international opening thing, for a while. And I set up the first, inside sales organization that has grown to be something huge now within Regis. But and funny enough, we set that up in Phoenix. So I came and we set one up in Belfast initially, and that went really well. And then the company had asked me to come across and work with Lorraine to do the same thing for the US. And that started initially in Phoenix, and then after the acquisition, we moved that to the GMO's offices down in Florida, where we kind of grew that, and then ultimately it moved to Dallas. So
wait, and you're in, for the listeners, you're in Houston.
Actually, I'm in Dallas.
You're in Dallas. Why did I think?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
Houston is where the conference is.
I wore my
Is that-
Dallas
Hey,
shirt for
Big
you
D.
guys today.
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Totally.
Yeah,
Okay,
so I'm in Dallas. You got confused because I'm actually driving to Houston
that's
for the
why.
immersive
For the
conference.
immersive, I know
Yeah,
that I'm
absolutely.
gonna miss. Okay, awesome. That's why. Yeah,
yeah.
you were like in between at the lake.
Yeah.
So wait, is your wife British or American?
She's American.
Okay.
Yeah.
I in my next life am going to marry someone with a British accent. Just so
Oh,
you know.
you really?
Life is
Okay.
too short to not have that accent in my house all the time.
Okay. I think she was over it after like our first 2 weeks.
Probably. I did think that. I was like, it's probably like marriage in general. You're like, meh.
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah. I'm over it now. Yeah. Stop sounding so silly.
I'm supposed to say stuff like that, Jamie, not you.
Uncensored.
Yeah.
We're uncensored, Geo.
Yeah, we are.
Wait, I had a question about Dell. Oh, wait, you mentioned a couple of names. Nobody listening has any idea who you're talking about. Remind me who owned HQ? Was that where Laura Kay was for a while? Was she there? Trying to remember her background.
I don't think so.
Okay. Who owned HQ when Regis acquired it?
So, oh gosh, I think I'm right in saying that John. I think John was part of it. John Arenas.
Oh, okay.
I could be wrong. So, John, if you
So
if you're listening to this and I'm wrong.
John owned a group that was bought by.
Oh, that's right.
HQ.
Yeah,
That's right.
Who was the guy that
that's
ran
right.
HQ? I know who he is. I can't think of his name.
I can't remember his name.
Okay, it'll come back to us. Who's
Well,
Lorraine?
Yeah.
So Laura Kay's background is she was a regional VP of HQ.
Yeah.
Okay.
She spent 19 years.
Yeah. So I
I
think
have no idea that's what she made.
She began at Ventas, which became HQ.
okay.
where she
Right. There was a
rose
lot of I mean, for
Northeast
people
Vice
listening,
President.
Regis used to do a lot of acquisitions of regional operators, right? I mean, that was Williams, Abbey got acquired.
Yeah.
That used to
There was a lot of
happen.
consolidation around that time.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep.
So here's the rest of it. So she managed 80 locations with 5,000 customers and 7,500 offices that totaled 3 million square feet and generated 180 million in annual sales. This is the part that you were talking about. While HQ, she played a lead role in consolidating the industry by integrating more than 15 new companies, acquisitions, and opening and developing 21 new centers. So there's a big roll up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was huge at the time. I mean, it was crazy. I remember going back and forth with Chris Elliott.
I thought Chris was part of that. Yeah.
So,
again, we're going back
whenever Chris and I talked about it, I would talk about the Regis acquisition of HQ, and she would always correct me and say it was a merger. So
I love
debated that.
Chris awesome. Elliott is one that I keep thinking she's not going to be able to stand to stay out of the industry, but she seemed to be okay. Chat GPT will not tell me who owned. It's not HQ was owned by IWG. No, stop. Okay, this is a Chat GPT fail. I said, who owned HQ when Regis acquired them? HQ, also known as HQ Global Workplaces, was owned by IWG when Regis acquired them. No, that is
no, totally wrong.
No sense. Yeah. I know. Nice try, Chat GPT. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'll have to go ask Google. I'll go old school.
Yeah.
So from HQ/Regis, then you went to Premier?
I went to Premier. Had 5 great years with Premier, working with Jeff and Willie and the group there. They were just amazing. The whole team is amazing. Just a great group. So, and I think Jeff is one of the best operators in this business. And it's just my personal opinion. I think he does an amazing job. If you're trying to run this business profitably, for sure, he does a great job.
We need to get him on stage.
They've never lost money.
They never lost money.
He's just an incredibly shrewd operator that has built a great community within his organization. His team are outstanding, and he's shrewd, no doubt. Really talented operator, great leadership.
And Jamie, while he was at Premier, he had to manage the Energizer Bunny / nonstop face tuts.
Yeah. Look, Don't get me started. Don't get me started. I mean, if you want to talk about some of the toughest time, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, Faye's awesome. She is a firecracker for sure. But
she's another example of like can't leave.
no.
Yeah.
But and she still hasn't really left, right? I mean,
no, definitely not. I think she's
not working necessarily for a
tangential, but really still in it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I would say she's in it deeper now than she's ever been because she's got
different
relationships, right?
Yeah, maybe
embedded in one company. Okay, and so then
I'm exhausted just spending 5 minutes in the room with her. Just I don't know where she gets the energy from.
Yeah. So you did 5 years there, and then from
Yeah.
there you went and did a brief consulting stop at Executive Workspace, right?
Yep, I did. Yep.
Help kind of build that and launch that. I got up to 15 locations or 16,
Wow.
and they closed one pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was working with Brenda over there, who again is another really talented, seasoned veteran in the industry.
She's on our list, Gio. We got to put her on the next.
Yeah, you should. She's awesome. So.
She's shy. She keeps sidestepping this podcast.
Let me try.
She's another one of those. And then kind of, I think I told you about City Central was kind of kicking off and starting, and I told you to call those guys. And
yeah, you and Cameron over at Workplace Strategies said, hey, these guys are, they're trying to get into this. And so anyway, I reached out to them, and we built it up over several years to be a number of different locations. And again, great guys to work. Very, very different experience working with the City Central ownership group, because really that was my first time of working for pretty much purely real estate driven guys. They weren't, the co-working was and the flex space was, a model that they chose to put into their locations to monetize a location, but they primarily are real estate driven guys. And when you work for real estate guys versus operators or an operating group, they look at things very differently. So, it's actually very interesting and has been extremely educational in terms of, the different ways of looking at the different business models, right? So, but yeah.
I'm going to ask Gio's question. What was their why for, and what was their model? Is it flexible workspace? Is it fully serviced co-working? What does it look like?
No, it's flex space. Predominantly the office product, right, which we all know is probably the key to success. But they built a building from ground up, and they actually, I think they went to a GWA conference and heard all about co-working and flex space and said, hey, this sounds good. How difficult can it be? I seem to remember that. I seem to remember that being their line to me. Yeah, it didn't look that difficult.
You should get a T-shirt with that. How hard can it be?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter, they found out how difficult it could be. So, we got talking and said, we just got the one location, but we're interested in growing the business. It's probably not really the size of business that you'd be too interested in at this point, but, can you help us out? So, but it turned out to be, a great experience. And I think, they look at things differently because it's primarily the real estate investment, right? So when you look at the P&Ls and everything, when you're an operator, you've got rent, you've got, expenses, all these good things. But as a real estate investor, and frankly, that's probably what helped us through COVID, quite a bit really, was their approach was, look, the operations, we've definitely had a hard time, as everybody did, but the asset itself is doing very well. So they were far less concerned about the overall, performance of the.
But how are they financing the operations during COVID?
So basically, we actually did well. They just gave the operations a break on rent.
Okay.
But they could afford to do that because they were the owner of the asset.
Yeah, but they could still pay their mortgage. They didn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. But they're not trying to get the full market rent from it. So that was good. Yeah.
So what was their why for putting flex in to this asset?
I just thought they, as I say, they went to one of the conferences and said, this is actually something really interesting and cool. Let's try it. And now I think if you were to,
so was it financially motivated? Was it, we want to amenitize the building? We think this makes the building more attractive? Like, what was their?
It was purely a use for that real estate that they found to be interesting. So, and they, you know, they're very entrepreneurial, and they thought it was a cool concept. They wanted to try it. And certainly the first location that they opened, which is now the most mature, is absolutely, they now recognize the financial benefits to putting flex space in. They're getting way and above what they would on a traditional.
They're getting a premium. This is in Dallas. This is not in every.
No.
You know, Gio and I are, you know, working with landlords and helping landlords to understand, which I want to get your perspective on, you know, what's happening in the marketplace today. And it used to be that getting the premium to the rent was really the big why. Yeah. And now, you know, with the, you know, is it the why? And depending on the market, can you even do that? Or is it, you know, merely to sort of fill vacancy or make the rest of the building more attractive? But in markets like Dallas, you can still get a premium to market rent.
I think if you manage the business and it's not complicated. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. But if you manage the business, you know, in a way that, you know, we kind of know it should be managed, getting those premiums is still it's still absolutely possible, I think, in most
for the cases. Right building in the right market.
It's got to be the right building, and frankly, it's got to be the right landlord as well, right? They've got to be totally engaged in the projects and what we're trying to do. But so I think it's kind of all of the above. I think you can get above market rates for sure, or premiums even above operating expenses, as in, you know, operating the location itself. We see that pretty much in all of our locations where we work with folks. But I think you're right as well in saying that the amenitizing and creating amenities within the space that enhances the overall project is becoming more and more of a driver. You know, and we've said forever as well, the great thing about flex space is not only is it an amenity, not only can it produce you know, premiums, but it's a great incubator to grow your longer term, larger tenants within the building. And you know, we see that happen over and over again as well. So I think, you know, all of those things are motivators. And I think, to your point, in some cases, it's easier to achieve some than others. But all of those things are definitely on people's radars, for sure.
So speaking of why.
Yeah.
So what is your why?
You know, when we put the new company together, we wanted our why, right? So we wanted our tagline, and came up with all the usual suspects. And one evening, after a very, very long conversation with one of our customers that was not having the easiest time, we were talking about a particular problem that was, you know, really quite a concern for them around, you know, just how to keep funding the operation while we were trying to improve it. And we came up with some really creative ways around that, you know, involved conversations with the landlord and stuff like that. But we ultimately solved the problem. And I came away feeling great after that, not just because I was doing my job, but we'd really helped that individual. So our why, if you like, is achieving success, you know, by helping other people be successful. And that for me is probably the most rewarding part of what we're doing. We're having lots of different conversations with people that not everybody's in a great spot. And to be able to help them turn the business around, for it to become a pleasure versus a burden, that for me is extremely rewarding. Combined with building the team that we're building an extremely capable team And it's great to see them grow and become better and better at what they do, which benefits everybody. So I think building that team and the culture within the team and really helping our customers, just achieve that success is hugely rewarding.
And I think it's awesome. You've been able to help a couple of operators that are franchise driven to actually turn around their operations and become profitable again, right? Because, back to your point earlier during your sales pitch at the beginning, very, very well done. You were talking about how some of these people have outside jobs, right? They're not operators by trade.
Yeah, no, for
Some
sure.
are
Yeah.
coming from other fields, they're working other jobs. And I think those are the ones that struggle the most. Back to Jamie's t-shirt, right? Is how hard can it really be? And I think that's what people are running into. So can you give us a couple examples how you've helped those groups turn their spaces around?
Yeah, so there are common themes, right? So one in particular, I think I know which one you're referring to. You don't know what you don't know. So there are lots of things when we turn up. The first thing we do is we kind of do a health check, right? So and it comes down to simple things like, are we billing properly? Are the clients in the systems properly? Is our accounting in line? And when you get past the basics, then it's how are we spending marketing dollars? How are we, making sure the experience for the client is what it needs to be. But really getting those basics right. It's amazing to me how many things in the one instance that you're talking about, Gio, and it's not because anybody did anything purposefully wrong. They just really didn't know. So, it's more about making sure we're collecting all the money that should be paid, right? That we got people on the appropriate agreements. We have a pricing strategy, a product strategy in place, and just having all the basics of the operation totally lined up properly. That's the first thing. And then when you get past that, it's okay, now how do we market this space? How do we make sure we've got the right people in the right place to do great tours, close deals? And we always gravitate, I think, towards the revenue side of the business, but it's equally important to understand the cost side of the business, right? So where is money being spent that, maybe it shouldn't be, one of the things, obviously we charge a fee for what we do, but more often than not, we can get a lot of that back through just better management of costs and, rebalancing the business in such a way that it's kind of one cancels out the other, essentially. So really, in answer to your question, getting the basics right, getting a clear strategy in place with the people that can execute on it, and managing the business appropriately, really. But yeah, we should know how to do that, right? We've been doing it for 25 years, but it's not as easy. And for somebody that's new into the business, I'm sure it's like drinking, from a fire hose.
Well, I think too, it's really about knowing what levers to pull, which, people who have operated know,
Right.
and also having the perspective, which you have,
Mhm.
to know like what's possible, what should I be paying attention to, what,
Right.
because if you're running, if you have a day job or, running another business, you just don't have the attention to like be fully immersed. I think the way you put it might be sort of what I'm trying to say is like, you don't know what you don't know. And so you need to come in and tell, have somebody say like, here's where your focus should be, and the customer equity, a lot of the things you said, easy, but you need to know, what levers to pull and what's possible and what's not possible.
But it's even down to strategy. Jamie, you and I think, spoke a little bit about this when we were at the Juicy conference in Chicago. There are certain times during the lifespan of an operation, particularly in the early days, when there's strategy and tactics that you've got to employ, right? So your pricing strategy is going to be very different in the beginning as you ramp up. And I always like to refer to it as, does my strategy line up with my trading position? So my trading position is I need to fill up, generate revenue, to meet certain goals like break even. My strategy is going to be different during that than it is when I got a queue at the door, I'm full. Yeah, my pricing strategy is going to be different. And unless you get that right, you actually end up putting yourself in a pretty tough spot. But again, to your point, if you've not done it time and time again, you don't know, right?
You don't know, or you don't have the confidence. So
right.
Yeah, I think your team probably plays a lot of roles there. So I'm curious, coming from Regis, Gio and I, are doing some work trying to help landlords who are being approached by Regis understand kind of what are their options in the marketplace, because Regis comes kind of out of the gate and they're coming pretty hard out of the gates, with management agreement and specific structure. So, Gio and I have kind of a big why around helping landlords understand what's possible, what the, alternative options are, and really understanding what the business model looks like before they get married to the first person they date. What are you kind of seeing there? I'm sure, our sort of way at this is helping them understand, deal structures, and you're one of those options, right? Because the structure, we're gonna build it ourselves. We're gonna get somebody to run it. So you're one of those options for running it. Tell us what your perspective is on kind of what's happening there, and sort of this influx of like landlord interest in Flex.
Yeah, I think that the very fact that landlords are, having that interest in Flex is, number one, is a good thing, right? We've been talking about it for a while. I think it will continue to grow, quite frankly, particularly if commercial vacancies continue to rise, and that the marketplace gets a little more challenging. But, I don't think that there's necessarily right or wrong solution. I think it just depends what you want, right? So if you want an organization, a large multinational, international organization to come in, add under their brand, do their thing, there are going to be benefits to it for sure, right? Brand recognition being one of them. But you're probably going to pay for it, right? And, it's going, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine it makes sense to me that the amount of input that you can have in terms of what you want the space to look like, how you want the space to operate, it's going to operate like a Regis, right? I mean, it has to, and if I was in Regis's position, I'd want that to be the case too. But I think, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I'm finding more and more people are wanting to create. They love the concept of Flex, but they want to create their own brand or their own bespoke look and feel, and frankly, the way that they operate. So, if that's the way that you're leaning, you want it to be something very much along those lines, then, one of the big brands is probably not going to be the right option for you. If you want to be more involved and it to be much more of a project that reflects, your vision for that space, then you're probably going to want to speak to somebody else.
So I'm going to feed you this one because last time you failed it.
Okay.
So what is your why? He's about 2.5 feet tall.
Oh.
And always looks up at you.
My why? That why? Sorry, not the
your personal why.
I thought his why was pretty good the first time.
It was a really good. Okay. It was a really good professional why.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. Well, so I have an amazing family. I've got an amazing wife who is just awesome in every way, but also and an awesome daughter, son-in-law. But I have a grandson who's 5.5 years old, who is just amazing. Love him to death. He comes and spends a lot of time with Pepe and Diva. Pepe and Diva. He calls my wife Diva at her insistence, I will tell you. But we have a tremendous amount of fun with him, and he's a big wife for sure. It's without
Yeah, he
doubt.
helps you out. I mean, you have horses, and so he goes out and helps you with the horses and everything
Oh
else.
yeah, oh yeah, he does. Yeah, he's he's very brave. He doesn't let these 1,300-pound horses worry him at all. In fact, funny story. For the longest time, I would take him up to the barn and we'd be doing stuff, and I didn't really have to pay too much attention to what he was doing. And then on one occasion, I turned around and I couldn't find him. I couldn't see him anywhere. So I say, Liam, where are you? Where are you? And he goes, I'm in here, Pepe. So I walk out to the stables, and unbeknownst to me, he'd actually grown tall enough to be able to open the stable door. And I walk in there, and there he is in the stable with this 1,300-pound horse. And I'm like, your mother's going to kill me. You got to get out there. And I've been teaching him how to be safe around the horses. And when I chastised him a little for going in there, he said, don't worry, Pepe. He said, I told him I was coming, and I stayed away from his butt. That was it. That's what he told me.
See, he's got the right. He's listening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I just know how much you light up when you talk about him, and so it's always fun to hear the stories. I mean, because part of it, Jamie, that you'll find, I mean, you kind of have this to a certain extent as well with your work-life balance, but prior to the last year, Mark would actually work 4 days a week in the office and then fly to Colorado.
Yep.
So you want to tell us a little about that and kind of how that came about? And
so we've been going to Colorado for a while, and we've been renting a house up there, and we fell in love with a little place called Ridgway, Colorado. And if you know Josh from Proximity, Josh actually lives in Ridgway.
That's why it sounded familiar, because
I didn't realize that. But anyway, long story short, we decided we'd try and find somewhere to buy so we could go up there with our 5 crazy dogs. And we did. We found a little place up there. And so that was my schedule. I'd work, pretty much Monday through Thursday, and then fly up there for the weekends. But so we love it up there. It's a great place.
Population 1,200.
Yeah, it's not big. It's good. It's getting bigger. It's getting bigger.
Oh, but it's not that far from Dallas. Oh, interesting. My geography in that area is, I'm doing really quick side note. I'm running a program. It's like an economic development program that I got recruited to do actually by one of the Proximity guys. And it can't be super far away. It's for some really, really small towns who are looking at co-working as economic development. There are people coming in and buying buildings. And so there are some landlords on the call who want to contribute to the economy and figure out, how do they participate and sort of what's the next evolution of
That's cool.
kind of in the valley. Yeah, it's a neat project. So anyway, very cool.
So are you finding quite a bit of that, Jamie, now where the smaller towns, even remote towns, are more on the radar versus the more established markets? You're getting more and more.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Gio and I have been talking about the challenges of how you may see this too in your work, like landlords just becoming really, really what's the word I'm looking for? There's a high bar to get into commercial space in some cases, especially in some of the hot markets like a Dallas or a Florida.
Right.
Where the landlords just want really significant, guarantees, and
for sure.
they want really credit-worthy tenants. And so that's, a more challenging, you got to have really sort of, deep pockets to be investing in co-working in some of those markets. But I think, and this is probably a little bit of my why, then there are markets where, folks are trying to figure out, one of the groups that's in this, one of the guys that's in this group runs the Boys and Girls Club, for this region, and it's underserved, but people live there, and a lot of artisans and makers, and so trying to find how can you create shared resources that have a physical manifestation to support these local entrepreneurs, which is not what we spend most of our time on. And I've had to really pull myself out of my commercial capitalist brain of how to make money on these spaces and really think about what that looks like. So Yeah, and I think, and people are moving there, right? There's some people on this
Exactly.
call who are like, kind of like what you said, like, well, we lived here and we bought some land, and now we're, in this remote area, and we want to contribute to what's happening.
But that's happening more and more. I think people are moving, lifestyle changes, but they still want to work, and they don't necessarily want to work from home. And I think
that would be a part of something, be a part of the
exactly.
community. Yeah.
I think you'll see more and more spaces open up in what could today be considered pretty remote markets.
Yeah.
But interesting.
So back to where you started.
Back where we started.
So you are doing incredible work helping people operate their existing business, set up new business. You've got new partners that are kind of eager and aggressive to jump into this space, in addition to Stephen made the transition with you, right? Am I allowed to?
Steve did, yeah.
So he's got an amazing partner that balances him out. He's kind of like a unicorn. Sometimes he appears, sometimes he doesn't.
Exactly.
He lets Mark do all the hard work, and then he takes some of the credit for it.
Right, exactly. No, it's great to have those guys behind us. I think that does make all the difference. When you've got partners that are totally engaged and behind you, both financially and also in terms of the vision. That makes a huge difference. So we're really fortunate to have that, and frankly, it just makes it even easier for us to really focus in on executing on what we're here to do versus worry too much about things like funding, stuff like that. So that's a real benefit for us for sure. Yeah, it's all good.
Well, we look forward to continuing to find ways to work together. That's exciting. I know that we've talked about, how do we collaborate with you as Jamie are out having a bunch of great conversations. We'll continue teasing people. We've got a webinar coming up that's about non-traditional real estate deals, i.e. management deals. And I know that's really what you've kind of done and been pushing. So excited just to figure out how to do more work together.
Yeah, I think I think there's a long road ahead for sure, in a very positive way. I think more and more opportunities going to pop up for sure.
Which is what keeps you going after.
Exactly.
Totally.
After 25 years.
Like the Madonna analogy, Gio. Yeah, Mark, thanks for joining us. Gio gets to see you in person at the Immersive this week, and hopefully see you in September at GWA. Yeah,
I'll be there for sure. Thanks for inviting me on. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Bye.